I will share my story with the MISC. I will try to be as accurate as I can. There will be pain, agony, tears, joy, blood, murder, dead bodies, war, hunger, starvation, fights and more in my life. I am not looking for sympathy or praise. I am working night shift lately, and I will keep you entertained if you care to read. I was born in a small town in Bosnia in July 1981 to my father and mother. I lived a normal life in a small town. My parents worked nearby and took care of me and my siblings. We had a nice house, roof over our head, a nice car and went out as much as we could. Living in a small town meant that I knew everyone there and they all knew who I was and who my parents were. I did not watch much TV since we had about 2 or 3 channels and they hardly ever showed anything for the kids. They would show Tom and Jerry once a night for about 10 minutes or so around 7 p.m. Instead, I spent a lot of time playing with my 2 dogs and friends and neighbors. My neighbor, who was about 3 years older, would always find a reason to beat me up, whether when we played soccer and I scored he would find a reason to beat me up. I spent a lot of time going over to my grandfather's house and listening to him tell me about WW2, the Germans, partisans, Chetniks, Ustas, and how he survived through the war as a child. I was always intrigued by his stories and even the story he told me over and over about the American bomber that crash-landed in the big field about half a kilometer from my home in 1944. Little did I know that in 1992 I would live a life of war and go what my grandfather went through. I started going to first grade in 1988 when I was about 7 years old or so. I remember the first day of school and my mother spilling water after me on the front porch for good luck, or I guess to be a good student. I was always a good student, got good grades and never studied hard. The teacher used to beat us when we did not memorize songs or chapters from books. I remember one time I was running around the teacher's car. It was a Zastava, mind you, a brand new one. Today when we look at the Zastava it's utter trash, but back in 1988 in former Yugoslavia, that was a great car. I was first grade and was running around with a friend, playing tag, when I slammed into the mirror of the car and it broke off. I hit it with my head. The other kids ran immediately to the teacher and told on us. He came out, picked me up by my ears, put me down, and slapped me across my face. His face was all red, and he was very mad, slapped my friend too across the forehead, and he fell on his ass. He never told my parents or anyone. Next day his car was fixed. I always feared that man. I feared him more than God or my parents. My mom used to come to the meetings with the teacher and tell him, "Please sir, if he is no good, not a good student, does not get all his beat him." One day I was leaving for school in the morning and I had a small cat. Before I walked out the door I saw that he had a little mouse in his mouth. I figured good cat. But then I saw the little rat's tail move. I walked over to the cat, took the little rat, and put it in my pocket. I brought the rat with me to school. Showed it to the girls, they all screamed and ran. Again, they told the teacher. We got into class, I was ready, and knew I was in trouble. As he walked in, we all stood up as usual, silence, like little soldiers. He said, "Good morning, sit down now." We all sat down. He looks up and says, "Where is the mouse hunter?" No one says anything. He points at me, says, "Come here." I walked up to him, he slaps once, then twice across the face. Then he says, "Where is the mouse?" I said, "I let him go over by the pond." He asks, "Did you kill him?" I say, "No, I let him go." He says, "Good boy, go sit down." I remember to this day the girl that told on me. It was this little teacher's pet. I don't remember her name, but she was a year younger and was very pretty and popular. I hated that girl. During recess, even in first grade, we would have fights, just a boys' fight to see who is strongest. The 2 teachers and the janitor of the school would go outside, sit on the bench, pick out their favorite boys, and made us fight. Most fights I won. I think I won almost all of them in my class. We would fight until one started crying or bleeding, or the teacher said stop. Most recess days were spent playing soccer outside on the gravel or fighting amongst each other. Some days, even when the teachers and janitor were not outside, we would fight just to fight. It was in our blood now. There was one kid, about a year younger than me, but bigger and stronger. I had to rely on technique to beat him. I beat him as many times as he beat me. His name was Dennis. His mother killed her husband, their father, with an axe. He was abusive, had 9 children, would drink, come home and beat her every night and the kids. He would throw her out the second-story window with the kids sometimes. One night she decided to kill him, took an axe, and hit him while he was passed out from alcohol. She hit him with the blunt part of the axe on the head. He jumped up, grabbed her by the throat and started choking her. Her older son grabbed the axe, used the sharp end, and hit him on the back of the head. They dragged the body down the road about a quarter mile after midnight so no one could see. Tried to make it look like a robbery. Inspectors said this man was killed at home. The dead guy's dog was there and buried the dead guy's head with his paws with dirt. This means the dog followed the body from the house. Dennis's mom was found guilty and sent to jail. She spent a few months there and came back. The state did not want to feed 9 children. My uncle had a nice dog, a poodle I would say, very playful and very viscous too. It would hunt rats in the house. I remember sleeping one night on the couch in the living room and felt something crawling on me. Then I opened my eyes, looked on the top of the couch. In the moonlight through the window I saw the rat. It was huge, just walking across the couch. I don't remember what happened next. I think I went back to sleep, but that is an image that is in my head to this day. My uncle would bring that poodle to the house. The poodle would find the rats and catch them, just like a cat. There was a river close to my house, about half a mile away, a nice clean beautiful river. During the summer we would go there and swim and play in the water all the time. The poodle was funny as when dipped in water and taken out, it was not able to see from all the hair, so even when out of the water in my uncle's hands, it was still paddling with its feet in the air. That to me was the funniest ever. My father taught me how to swim in the river. He worked out of the country and I was about 9 when he came one summer and asked, "Did you learn how to swim yet?" I said no, but I can dive where I want to go. He picked me up and threw me off the ledge. The drop was about 12 feet or so, the depth was about 10 feet. I dove back to the shallow end and got out. My father said, "Okay, but you have to learn to swim." I think that summer I learned how to swim. One summer day a neighbor from the upper part of the town was walking with his friends by my uncle's house. He was about 15 or so and his friends. I think I was 10 or so. He also had a similar dog to my uncle's. The friends said, "Let's see the dogs fight." They told me, "Let the poodle out and let's see the dogs fight." The owner of the dog said no, don't do it, but his friends kept saying do it. I did. My uncle's dog jumped on the other dog and mauled it. The other dog ran. My uncle's dog ran after him, caught him and mauled him some more. Blood was everywhere. I did not think much of it until next week as I'm walking home from school. The boys pointed to me, and out of the bush this 15-year-old boy came out with gloves on. He ran up to me, punched me in the face, and down I went. I tried to turn around, cover up and get up, but before I got up he kicked me in the head. Then I went into fetal position and covered my face while he kicked me, spit on me and cursed me. His friends joined in. After a few minutes I got up, dusted myself off and went home, but made a mental note that when I grow up I am going to kill him. Between 88 and 92 I went to school, started smoking with my friends, found weed leaves and chewed on them, went to the river, swam in the summers, played soccer, got into fights with friends. Got picked on by my older neighbor and beat all time. During the holidays we would steal a case of beer and drink it midday, then the heat would hit us and we would end up throwing up. Imagine seeing a couple 10-year-olds sitting on the curb with a case of beer next to them, throwing up. That was me and my cousin. In America you would never see that, but to us that was life, no care, no one cared. One day I had a big dog that was about the size of an American mutt. The neighbor had a small dog, looked like a terrier, always barked at everyone, and was a shitty little dog, just like my neighbor. His dog used to always chase my big dog and bite on him. The neighbor always made fun of me and my dog. One day his little dog chased my dog into my dog's dog house. Then you heard one yelp and my dog walking out with the little dog in his jaws with blood coming from the little dog killed the neighbor's dog, and I knew I had it coming this time. My father was a welder and there was always metal in the garage. I put a metal pipe in my backpack as I knew that jerk would come beat me up for my dog killing his dog. I put the pipe so one end is sticking out of my backpack and put the backpack on my back. As I was getting near the house, he is walking down the street with his friends smiling and hitting his fist into his other arm. About 2 feet in front of me as he stuck his hands out to get me, I did the He-Man pulling out sword from the back and hit him across the forehead. Blood started coming down his face and he fell backwards as his eyes rolled up in his head. I ran home, which was about a block away, with the bloody pipe. His father came to talk to my father. My father said, "Your prick son always beat my son," and I never said anything because they are children and we are neighbors. "And now you come to me, leave now or you will be bleeding worse than your son." That was the end of that. That kid never touched me again. I will update more as I have time and can remember events. I used to spend a lot of time with my grandfather. He would tell me stories how hard life was during WW2 and years after. His father was killed in WW2, possibly by the Serbs or the Germans. He was not sure, but he was born in 1932 and he remembered the war and all the ethnic and religions war that engulfed the country due to the Nazi invasion. When the Nazis invaded, the Croats, Serbs and Bosnians went at each other's throats. There was a woman, a Serb woman living not too far from my home. She would walk by my grandfather's house and he would tell me, "Look at her." I remember to this day when her and her mother strung up Fadl's father up against a tree and cut his throat. They killed him, and look at her walking around now, she is almost dead. She would walk through my parents' garden and I would throw rocks at her, but she would say things like, "You little Turk, I will kill you." I did not know why she would call me a Turk. But later I learned in school about the Ottoman Turks and their conquest of Bosnia and Serbia and how the Serbs were treated. That is why she called me a Turk, mother effer. My grandfather used to tell me, "Never trust a Serb, never trust a Serb." They killed my cousin after the war. My cousin was a great man, a huge man. His shoulders were massive, his hands and chest. He could easily carry 2 men on his shoulders. It took 2 Serbs with axes to kill him. And these Serbs were his friends. They got him drunk, caught him at night and hit him in the back as he was going home. They killed him. This was my grandfather's uncle. This guy intrigued me because he was so big and muscular. I later asked my father, and my father confirmed that this guy was a very big, muscular and strong man. But the reason the Serb killed him is because he was sleeping with the Serb's wife. Axe to the back of the head. The Serb served 9 years. The stories of killing and revenge were everywhere. My uncle's brother-in-law killed a Serb on a bus. Serb said something wrong to him. This guy was sitting behind him, took out a blade and slit his throat. This man served some time too, about 9 years or so. I remember when he came back and first time I saw him. I was terrified of this killer. He was bald, had earrings and tattoos all over. Looked like a bull to me. I grew up listening to war stories and people being killed. By this time in 1992 the former Yugoslavia was breaking up. Slovenia got independence after a small war. Croatia had a war and got its independence. We sat in Bosnia and watched on TV as the war in Croatia began and the Serbs slaughtered the people of Vukovar. In Bosnia talk of independence was already brewing, but Bosnia consisted of all 3 ethnicities, Bosnian Muslims, Serbs and Croats, or Muslims, Christians and Catholics. Everyone knew this was going to get bloody. People started selling their livestock to buy weapons. First time I saw an AK-47 my dad brought one home, then there were more and more, snipers rifles, RPGs, handguns, bombs, axe and all kinds of stuff. I used to go across Serb checkpoints with my dad to bring in weapons, while our people were getting killed, slaughtered civilians, me and my father were bringing in weapons to protect ourselves. It was all in vain though. The Serbs had an arsenal of weapons that at one time was the 4th strongest nation in Europe. The Bosnian people had nothing. Serbs systematically started cleaning out towns, killing, raping, pillaging and removing the Catholics and Muslims. Again all sides did this, Serbs did the majority, no Serb hate here, just those that killed the innocent from any side. The city center, police station, radio and everything was taken by the Serb army. On radio we would hear how the Muslims killed Serbs and the Catholics killed Serbs. We were surrounded by Serb army and paramilitary units called the Chetniks. These guys came in to take care of the civilians once the army left. These were the really bad guys. Rape and massacre was their specialty, it's what they enjoyed doing. My mother's village was about 5 miles away from the town where we lived now. Her family lived in that small town. We thought if we went up there and lived there since there was no Serbs nearby we would be safe. During '92 I did not spend much time playing with friends, as many already fled with their families. My father and mother could not leave as their job, which was now Serb-occupied and Serb-controlled, could not let them go. The Serbs said we cannot leave. I spent a lot of time listening to the radio, walking around with my 2 dogs. Watching our 1 cow that we had, I would take the cow to graze in the fields for almost all day long. I almost died because of that damn cow. I did not know that the cow was thirsty and it would run for miles to get to the water. I would catch up with her and chase her back, she would run again. I would chase her all day. One day she swam across the river, I tried to follow her and the current was too strong. I knew I was in trouble, was not able to swim back to the shallow end as I fought the current, and to stay afloat I felt myself sinking. I knew I was going to drown, there was no one around. No one to see me drown, I would wash down the river, maybe never be found again. As I started to black out and see stars I felt a hand grab me by my hair. It was a young man named Iders. He pulled me out and said, "I was fishing over there in the bushes and saw that you were in trouble." He saved my life that day. I stopped going to school. Serb children of the town continued to go to school. One day, a Serb classmate I used to beat up on all the time saw me at the river. Him and some older guys saw me there alone. I had a feeling that if they wanted to, they could kill me. No one would care, no one would be responsible. There was no law. They were the law, they did what they wanted to. He came down to me, grabbed my fishing pole, and threw it in the water. It floated down river. He asked, "Who is the law now, Serbs?" I said, "Yes, Serbs." He said, "You know me, and my friends can kill you now. No one can do anything. We are the law." I did not say anything. I stood there and looked at the 4 of them. He said, "I will see you later, just remember who the law is now." My father had a good friend, a Serb. He would bring my father alcohol and cigarettes, told him not to worry, that we will be fine. I felt hopeless. I watched my father sit in silence at night, smoke and listen to the radio for hours. Our small town was still not occupied by Serbs, but we were surrounded. We all had weapons, but compared to the Serb arsenal it was nothing. At night my father would go out and walk around with other neighbors on patrol. I always watched him leave, and I was scared I would never see him again. Every night he left I looked at it as it was his last time that I would see him, night after night. My father's Serb friend had a son, about 17, and by this time I was 11. He would pick me up on his motorcycle, and this is when I fell in love with motorcycles. We would ride to the Serb town, where I would eat at his house and just hang out. One day he rode to his friend's house with me. There was about 10 or so Serb teenagers. We got off the bike and one of them said, "I am going to war, I just got my papers, I'm 18, I'm going to kill me some Turks." He asked what my name is. I told him my name. He said, "Are you a Turk?" I said no. He said, "Liar." I said, "I swear on the Quran." He slapped me on the head, said, "Fuck you and your Quran." The guy I rode there with, my Serb friend, said, "He is just a kid, let him go, man." Last entry for the day. During this whole time, Muslim men and Catholic men were being rounded up and they were disappearing. Some were found dead, some were in the local prison. My father's boss and relative was in the prison. My mother used to go there to give him food. She would see him always beat up and he was malnourished. She would tell me and would say she hopes they never come for our father. One day these Serbs came. They were from the military police, at least they wore the uniform of military police. They took all the computers, cameras and other valuables from the firm where my father worked. They said they all confiscated it for military use. A few days later a general came there. A Serb general, and asked my father where the stuff is. My father said, "You guys took it," he said to us. He said, "The Serb military police, I was in the attic of the big hangar all this took place." The general took out a knife, put it to my father's throat and said, "What was his name?" "The name of the guy that took it." My father knew the name, knew the guy personally, but he did not say anything. My father said, "I do not know, they were military police, that is all I know." I saw all this and thought I will never see my father again. I swore if they kill my father that I will kill him sooner or later. He let my father go, and I never spoke to my father until years later that I saw that. By this time we decided to go to my mother's town and live up there while my father stayed home and worked. We went away and were there for about a week. Then we heard that the Serbs will be coming there first to attack and clear everyone out. We went back to our own town and went back to live in our house. Food was running low, there was no money, no place to travel, no way to find food. I remember going to some Serb neighbors once a week to get some flour so my mom could bake us some bread. My father put the flour there just in case something happened to him. The Serb neighbors would take care of us if they could. There was some flour, but no oil, no salt or sugar anymore. No cigarettes and no alcohol either. My dogs both now got really skinny, there was no more food. One day the Serb army came into the town and on loudspeakers and radio said, "Anyone that has a weapon needs to bring it to them and turn it in. They will not be touched. Once the Serbs come here again and search the homes, anyone with a weapon will be killed." So people started turning in their weapons. Now we were going to be surrounded with no weapons or food. This is it for today, we'll write more tomorrow. It was now I think May of '92. We came back to my town from my mother's parents' town. It was about a week later that the Serbs attacked my mother's parents' village town. My uncle, the one with the poodle who is my father's younger brother, was there when the Serbs went in and started clearing the village from Muslims. They came in uniforms and in trucks. Armed and ready, a unit of Chetniks came with them as well, and when the Chetniks roll in, bloodshed follows. My uncle was in the village because we have some family there. The Serbs came in to clear the village. When they entered the center and started walking up the street, one of the Muslims there had an AK-47 in one hand and a Kurin in the other. He ended up killing a young Serb soldier whom was about 19. The young Serb was from my town, and I knew his father as they lived in the same town as me, and they were always nice. The shooting of this young soldier started bloodshed like no one has ever seen there. The Chetniks started rounding up people. Men and boys were separated from the women. The women were told to walk to another village or two anywhere, but not to stay there. The Serbs lined the men up and the boys. Anyone that was 15 to about 60 or so was in one line, males only. The women walked by the line of their husbands and sons, that is the last time they would see them. This happened on the bridge over the river, where we used to swim. The Serbs had a Muslim man with them, a young boy. They made him tell who had guns and who did not have guns. This boy stood there and pointed at people. He probably had no idea who had guns or not. The ones he pointed at were immediately killed on the bridge and thrown in the river off the bridge. Their throats were slit by the Chetniks and they were thrown off the bridge. My grandfather was in that line. When his turn came to face the boys said, "No, he did not have a gun." The Serbs let him go. My grandfather walked to another village a few miles away, where they had some relatives. My uncle was at my grandparents' house when the Serbs attacked the village and started shelling the village. He ran for his life. He said he would hear the mortar coming in, and he would try to decide to run left or right. He said one was really close, where he darted left. The mortar hit about 20 meters away from him. He said if he would have went right, it would have hit him right on his back and blown him to pieces. He ran away from the village, came home and was white as a wall when I saw him. He came in the house, sat down on the sofa, and started crying. My mother asked about her parents. He said he doesn't know. On the way back running back to our town, the Serbs stopped him. On the checkpoint was one of my uncle's Serb friends. He told my uncle, "You are lucky to be alive, go home and never come back this way, they will kill you." My grandparents made it to a nearby town safe. Many people from the village did not make it, especially men and boys. My mother's cousin was killed by my neighbor Serb. They were friends and used to work at the same bar. My mother's cousin was wealthy. When the Serb asked for money, he said he did not have any. He shot him on the spot. This my father found out from my father's Serb friend and neighbor. He said, "I can't believe that he killed your wife's cousin, such a horrible man." They were friends. One house that was nearby to my grandparents' house, this man always hated Serbs, was a wealthy man, and always fought with Serbs. His sons and their wives and families were all hiding from the shells inside the basement of their home. About 23 or so family members. The Serbs came in there and threw hand grenades. Everyone died except a 18-month-old baby. The baby was found by my grandmother a few hours later under her mother. My grandmother was in shock for months after witnessing that bloodbath. I remember that summer going swimming in the river, even though my father told me not to go. I remember one day diving, and as I opened my eyes, there was a decomposing body of a young man in the water. His eyes were all eaten up. As I opened my eyes in the water, that body was about 2 feet in front of me. I never went to swim again. I never told my father or anyone, because he told me not to go there and would have beat the crap out of me. My grandparents' town was cleaned out. During the siege, I could climb on a nearby hill and watch as the mortars hit the red brick roofs of the houses. The houses were burning, and people were being exterminated left and right. My grandmother's aunt, she was over 80 years old, was hooked by her throat. Imagine a pirate hook. Someone puts it in your throat and rips it out. That is how she was killed. My father's cousin was taped to a Serb army jeep and driven to a nearby Serb hospital. Inside the jeep was a wounded Serb. They tied my father's cousin to the front and drove him on the hood just in case someone tried to shoot at the Serbs. He survived and would come back a couple days later into my town with his whole family. He came there and lived with my uncle and grandfather, my father's parents, for a few weeks till the Serbs came and took everyone away. Me and my mom went to see her parents in the nearby village, where they stayed with some relatives. We got them to come and live with us in our town. Now I had both of my grandparents living with us in the same town. My father's house, my 2 uncles and my grandfather's house were all only a few hundred feet away. During the nights, we would sleep in the basements of the nearby neighbor houses. The Serbs were shelling nearby towns at night. It got old waking up at 2 a.m. once the shells start coming down, then going to a neighbor's basement. I remember one night my cousin, who was about 10 at that time, did not want to wake up. There was no electricity. All you can hear is shells falling down. Our house was safe as a few hundred meters were a dozen or so Serb houses. But my father still made us go to the shelter. My grandma was crying and pulling on my cousin to wake up. He was sound asleep with the shells falling down. He said, "I don't care, let them kill me, I am tired of this every night." Once he said that, I laughed so much because I felt the same way. I did not care anymore. I wanted to sleep in my own house and bed. But still that night we went to the shelter. We were only little kids. My father's other brother lived in another city, and he was arrested by the Serbs and jailed because he had a gun, a registered gun before the war, years before the war. He was beaten daily. He was a professor at the local university. The men in his jailhouse were taken by day and shot executed. The day that his turn came up to get killed, a young Serb lieutenant came to escort him to the shooting place. As he saw my uncle, he hugged him and said, "Professor, I can't believe they have you here. I will take you home." My uncle was saved that day, but we had no idea. We have not heard from him for weeks. We would find out his story only months later, when we saw him in another city. The extra family members living with us now meant the food supply was really short. There was no food, no stores to buy food, no money to buy food. We were not allowed to travel anywhere. People started starving and looking for anything edible to eat. People started stressing, women started crying, those that have lost loved ones started asking why they weren't killed too. At least once a week in the middle of the night, Serbs would come to our front door, early morning hours 1 or 2 a.m. They would ask for my father. Every time I would wake up and look at my father, he would touch me on the head and say, "It's okay, son, he'll be back." But in his eyes I knew what he was thinking. This might be the last time I see him. My father brought in weapons and sold weapons to the Muslims, many of them. My father's boss, who was in jail beaten by Serbs daily, all he had to do was say my father's name, and that would be the end of that. The Serbs would ask my father to start up the nearby flour mill and to work. My father's friend and a Serb was tasked to watch over the operation and watch over my father so the Serbs do not kill him. This is the first time that I saw my father's friend with a gun holstered to his belt. For some reason I felt that my father was safe there with this our Serb friend. I was right, he was safe, but it made me wonder, what has this come to, a friend watching over a friend with a gun, friends and neighbors that are now enemies. The food was scarce, no electricity, no running water, no movement out of the town. I spent the days playing with my dogs, staying at home listening to my grandma talk about what she has seen. We were sitting in a fish bowl, and as the Serbs cleaned out the nearby towns we waited for our turn. I would go out into the fields with some boys that were left in the town, and we would roll up leaves in paper and smoke them. My father's relative, a funny guy, came over one day to my father and said, "Smoke this, it will relax you." It was weed, but I did not know at that time. They smoked and smoked, many of them. This guy had a plantation growing, a big wad of 100s of douche marks on him. He was bawling, selling weed to the Serbs and everyone else. I never tried weed with them, even though that had me very interested in what the hell were they smoking. How could I get my hands on that? I never got a chance to smoke weed, even though I did know what it was. My father's cousin that came from my mother's parents' village was about 25 or so, young man with a young family. A very nice guy, he would spend a lot of time with me going places looking for food. Many of the Muslim homes were empty as they all fled before the war began and the systematic ethnic cleansing. We hardly ever found any food anywhere. By this time I stopped feeding my 2 dogs. They were very thin, could not walk and play anymore. They would disappear for days at a time, I don't know where, maybe food hunting. This is why I'm sharing my story. It is hard for someone born here in the USA to understand what me and some of my Bosnian brothers went through. You might think it's copy and paste, that it's not real, that it's made up. I will tell you no, there are thousands of stories like mine and people that had it even worse. Whenever you think that you have it bad in the USA, remember you are sheltered like a baby here and have nothing, absolutely nothing to complain about. Be grateful, I am. One day a local from the town, a young guy about 24, went fishing at the river. He was a really nice guy. His name was Samir. One of the greatest soccer players I seriously have ever seen. He would score a goal from the midfield, had such an amazing kick and control of the ball would fly like a bullet. I was always impressed by his skills. I looked up to this young guy. He played for the local team and was the best possibly in the region. He went fishing and was never heard of again. His parents and the folk in the town started to worry about him. One of my relatives said that he was fishing that day and saw him too, but does not know what happened to him. He said that he was shot at from across the river by Serbs with a handgun. They almost got him, but he ran home and never went fishing again in that area. His name was Omar, and he was a really nice guy too. He was related to my father somehow. Married man about 30 years old and had a wife and 2 kids. Omar was later killed by an unexploded mortar where he found it when he was fighting the Serbs. He found the mortar in a park and took it to the base to get it disarmed. Omar fled to the Bosnian Muslim side, took up arms, and was fighting against the Serbs. While walking back with the mortar, his axe hit the mortar and it exploded, blew him in half. He lived for about 5 minutes or so after that. I decided I would go to the river again and swim. It was a hot summer, and I was bored. Walking to the river through the fields, I heard a machine gun go off. The Serbs driving by in trucks opened fire on the mosque. The mosque was one of the left ones in the whole region. The rest, when the Serbs cleaned out the villages, they burned down or blew up the mosques. While I was walking to the river, I heard the machine gun and saw white smoke coming from the mosque as the large white minaret was getting hit with bullets. Walking through the fields, I smelled the worst possible smell ever, the only smell that a decomposing body can have. I walked up on the remains of Samir, the soccer player. At that time I did not recognize him. I saw a body lying there, naked with scars all over the torso, maggots were all over the cut-up chest and stomach. The head was decomposed, and the head was severed from the body. The head was located next to his torso. I ran back to the first house, which belonged to my father's cousin. He was not there, but I told his mother. I went home and told my mother. She yelled at me for going to the river and yelled at me for going to inspect the body. I had nightmares about that body for years after. Samir was buried the next day. His parents did not recognize him, but they only recognized the clothes that he had on him. The pants and the belt was all that he had on him. His mother never believed that it was her son, dead like that. Later, after the war, she was called and someone asked her $10,000 and they would give her information about Samir. I don't know what happened to that, but I am pretty sure that was Samir. He was tortured and killed. Took about a week for the body to show up. Who knows how many days he was tortured and how he was killed. The chest on his torso had all kinds of cuts, his back as well, looks like he was cut with a sharp object and tortured. Then later his head was severed from the body. I don't know why someone would do something like that. I went to the funeral, I saw them put the body casket in the grave, but I continued to have dreams and nightmares about it. To this day I have that image burned in my mind, and it is clear as it was that day when I first saw the body. The Muslim population of the town was now terrified. No one had any food and no one had any place to go. The Serbs that lived in the town were scared for us too, I would like to think. My father's Serb friends would come over and talk about the front lines, about the war, and how they hate what is happening to us all. One day as we were sitting in the living room, my mother, my two siblings, my father and my mother's parents, I saw a soldier in uniform walking up the street. I said to my mom, "Look, a soldier just walked by." She said, "Where?" I did not see one. "What are you talking about?" As we looked out the window, our living room door opened and two Serb soldiers with Alaska S pointed at us were standing there. The two Serb soldiers came in and said, "Do you have any weapons in the house?" My father said, "No, we do not have any weapons." One of the Serbs said, "What if we check and find some? Which one of your kids do we kill?" My father said, "Check, we do not have any weapons, and neither of my kids is going to die today." By this time a third soldier walked in, saw my father and said, "Hey, don't worry, everything is good." He grabbed the other two soldiers and pushed them out. He said to my father, "We are here to collect all of the refugees that came from the village." My father said, "These are my in-laws, they are fine to stay here with me. Do not take them." The soldier said, "We have to, there is no choice, we have to take them." By this time, my mother's father, my grandfather stood up and said, "Okay, let me get my bags and we are coming with you." My grandma started crying and my mother, the soldier said to my father, "I am sorry, but these are my orders." My father said, "I understand." I would not see my grandparents for at least 3 months again. They were taken to a factory in the center of the city. There they were put in a big hole and made lay down on the concrete. There was no bathroom or anything in the area. People had to use a corner of the big hole to go to the bathroom. The place started to reek and they were not given food or water for days at a time. Mothers with young children had the hardest time. For many of the women the worst was yet to come. The younger women were picked out and led into a room. There they were raped by Serb soldiers. One after another took their turns raping the women. The women then were led back into the hole and nobody said anything. This lasted for 9 days. The people were all rounded up and put into semi-trucks, some were put into box trucks, and they were all transported to the Bosnian Muslim and Catholic side. Many of the Bosnian Muslim cities and Catholic cities were able to defend themselves from the Serbs. The Serbs decided to ship all of the remaining Muslims and Catholics to those cities, such as Tuzla and Travnik. My grandparents were dropped off on top of a mountain with the rest of the people the Serbs had caught. They walked about 15 miles to get to the safety of the Bosnian army and the safe zone. The men that were gathered and in the hall for 9 days were mostly taken and sent to the Manjaka concentration camp. Google that for pictures. Now that the Serbs collected the refugees from the other villages, there was only a few smaller villages and towns with a Muslim population left. I felt that we are a small number and they will easily dig a large grave, execute us and just bury us. A very simple task and an easy job to do. Now the depression set in for everyone, the fear and the not knowing, included with hunger, no electricity, people were anxious to leave. I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, my father's father. He would tell me how he survived during WW2, how he served in the Yugoslav army. He told me how after his father's death in WW2 him and his older brother with their mother lived in a small mud hut. The mud hut would be surrounded by wolves at night in the winter, and his older brother would have to sit at the door and hold the door so the wolves do not come in. They lived in the end of the town, and this was the late 1940s. There was no electricity or major roads in the area. We all just kind of hanged out at home, sat there in silence and wondered, what will happen to us? My father was busy during the day working for the Serbs. My mother cried a lot. Me and my siblings did not do much but stay at home and just wait for the inevitable. Some Serbs would come by and say, "Do not worry, we will organize a transport out of here, you will go over to the Muslim side and you people will be fine." This kind of gave us hope, but my father knew that they would not let him go. He was the only one left that knew how to operate the machinery at the factory where he worked for the Serbs now. It was finally time for us to leave. We had packed bags of stuff we needed to bring. The hardest part for me was watching my grandfather cry. His father and his father's father and generations back all have bled on that land where we lived. They have bled, died and fought on that land, lived and were buried there. My grandfather cried for hours at a time, would sit there, smoke, pet his dog and cry. I did not understand why he was in such pain at that time. But now I understand why. He always knew though, that land was his and no one would be able to take it from him. Sooner or later he would be back. We got all of our stuff together. What I missed the most was leaving my dogs. I sat there with my grandfather and watched as he cried petting his dog. My dog was at my feet, like he knew that he would be alone from then on. We all walked to the center of the town. The Serbs had brought semi-trucks there. No buses, just semi-trucks. People were anxious to get on the trucks and leave. People started moving around and trying to jump into the trucks, as if there was not enough trucks for everyone. Commotion ensued, and one of the Serb soldiers pointed his Alaska in the air and let out a burst of bullets. He said, "Calm down everyone," and then pointed the gun at the people. He said, "Wait your turns. You will all have time to leave and space, we will be bringing in more trucks." Me and my mother and two siblings waited for another truck. The truck came, my father came with us. He decided he had to leave. He knew if he stayed he would be the only Muslim left in the area. On top of that, when the Muslims attacked to take back the area, he would be killed, no doubt about it. My father's Serb friend, the one that was watching over him, told him, "I will take care of the factory, you have to leave." He came over a night before we were to leave, he said. When they ask me what happened, I will just say you left and that I did not see you. He then handed my father some money that he had saved up. This is why I do not hate all Serbs and the Serb people. We got onto the trucks and we started going. We drove for about 12 hours over some of the roughest mountain terrain. It was miserably hot summer day. When we drove through Serb towns, the children would throw rocks at the convoy and many people got hit by the rocks. We stopped at one of the creeks where people could get some water and get out of the trucks. We were locked in there like sheep. The sides and the rear of the truck were closed in. Imagine over 100 people in blistering heat inside a truck. There was hardly any air in there. Many people passed out. I do not know if anyone died. I do not remember much of it. I remember one of the drivers, a childhood friend, a Serb, told my dad, "What the fuck are you doing here? You are supposed to stay and work." My father said, "Shut the fuck up and keep your mouth shut. You did not see me." We got back into the trucks and started going again. We got on top of this mountain. It was a little past midnight. Pitch dark outside. The trucks stopped and Serbs in masks came and started telling people to get out. People were hesitant as the men were masked, and it was pitch dark. All of a sudden a large caliber machine gun opened fire, and the Serbs started yelling, get out, go now. Go down that road, stay off the sides of the road, watch for landmines, and for dead bodies. The roads are mined, follow closely each other, do not get off the road. My mother and father took us by our hands and we started walking down this mountain road. It was pitch dark, no one had any lights, we just followed the people in the front in a large convoy walking. I would look at people from what I could see, old people, young people, children, hundreds of us walking this dark mountain road. People carried the old and the young. We had no idea where we were going and how long we are going to be walking. On the side of the road, you could see dead bodies. My mother would cover my eyes with her hand, but I had to look for some reason. Bomb craters were all over the road as well. I am off work, guys. I will update more tonight when I get to work. As we were walking down the mountain, the side of the mountain was lit up by the moonlight. Now you can see clearly the craters and the dead bodies of the refugees that were killed on the way to wherever they were going. I was holding my mother by her hand, my older sister was walking behind us, and my father carried a large bag with some clothes, and my littler brother, who was about 5 at that time, he walked with us as much as possible. About half an hour into the walk, masked Serbs came off the side of the mountain. They pulled out knives and guns and started hitting people in the face, robbing people for belongings. They made some men take off their watches, the women had to take off their jewelry. One of them came up to my mother, grabbed her by her jacket and said, "Give me the money, give me your money." My mother said, "I don't have anything, leave me alone, take the jacket." He pushed her and walked off. By this time my father, who was in front, came back and grabbed my mom and me and told us to keep walking. We walked for hours, I think it was over 4 hours, until we reached a tunnel in the road. We were up in the front of the big caravan. The tunnel was pitch dark, but we had no choice but to go into the tunnel. Some people had a flashlight and started using the flashlight in the tunnel. As we approached the middle of the tunnel, you could see a big pile of rocks in the middle of the tunnel. Big rocks, I'm thinking the size of cars, one on each side and a small space in between for people to start walking in. As the first people of the caravan started going through, and with some light that people had using flashlights, an armed man with an Alaska pointed at us jumped out of the dark corners of the tunnel. People stopped walking and started looking at him. He said, "Welcome to the Muslim Bosnia side." He then lit up a cigarette. He said, "You are about halfway to Travnik, a city that would let us stay there that was occupied by Muslim and Catholic armed forces." One woman walked up to the soldier and kissed him. She said, "Thank God for us finally making it here." We walked through the tunnel and finally started passing some villages along the road. We found a fountain near the road with running water. We all got some water and rested. It should have been about 4 a.m. by now. My father still carried that big bag, and my little brother was still walking. In front of the fountain I slipped on the mud and fell, got all dirty. My mom did not yell at me or care much. We continued walking and complaining. I kept asking my father, "When will we reach Travnik?" He did not say much, said, "Shut up and keep walking. Do not talk, shut up and keep walking." We walked for hours more, and it was starting to get light out. I finally started seeing some homes alongside the road. Many of them were burned down with bullet holes in them. I started thinking about my home, my dogs. My grandfather and my grandmother were a few meters behind us. He said my dog, the smaller one, when we were put in the trucks and taken away, he said he saw the dog run after the truck until he just couldn't keep up anymore. I made a promise in my head that I will go back and find my dog. He was my best friend and the only friend during the war. Even in our last days together, I shared my meals with him so my mother would not find out. Even being malnourished and half dead, he still had the energy to play with me. We finally arrived after it felt like we walked for days, but it was about 20 kilometers or so. We arrived at Travnik. It was a big school gymnasium. We walked in there in the morning hours. It was a rainy day and I felt sick and tired. We walked into the gymnasium and there was hundreds of people in there. There were people lying down all over. In the hallways, in the classrooms, all over. The school was packed with refugees. I do not know what happened next. I laid down and fell asleep. I woke up the next day, and I could not walk from my calves and legs being so sore. I told my mom, and she said it is okay, you will be fine, it's all the walking we did. I went outside and started walking around the school. I did not see many people around, only army trucks driving by. The school smelled horrible, and it smelled like everyone was sick in there. The bathrooms were clogged up and dirty. I started walking around and came back inside. I do not know where my father was. I asked my mother, and she said he went to take care of some paperwork so we can get into Croatia, as my uncle's wife was there in the capital of Croatia, Zagreb. We spent another night there, and then the next morning, my father said we have to leave from here, or we will all get sick. We have to move to Stari Travnik, that is where they have another school, and from there we will go to Croatia. In Croatia, a small coastal town Novi Vinodolski, that is where my mother had an uncle, and he had a huge house and a restaurant there, where he lived and worked. We got onto a bus and we were bused to Stari Travnik. We got to a school and went to one of the classrooms where we would sleep. I slept on a wooden desk with a small blanket to cover myself. I do not know how I slept on there as it was very uncomfortable and cold. I could feel myself moving every few minutes to adjust. My parents and siblings slept on the floor on some cardboard boxes. The people of Stari Travnik brought us some food, but there was hardly any to share for over 500 people. The next day the army brought some bread there, hardly enough. I think I remember eating a couple slices of bread from my mother and father. This went on for a couple days. I did not get out of the school much. I would walk out and just check out the bullet holes in the outside of the school. My parents forbid me to venture out. I remember one morning walking by this iron fence by the school. My parents warned me of sniper fire. As I was running along the fence, something in my mind told me to duck and run faster. As I did that, I heard a loud ping like a bullet hitting an iron fence a few inches above my head. I stopped venturing out after that for a few days. There was no more food. The Croats, Catholics and Muslims started beefing now. The Serbs told the Croats if they did not back Travnik, and the Muslims they would keep a part of Bosnia. One night the Croats started shelling Stari Travnik. One of the Muslim soldiers came into the school where we were sleeping. He had a Motorola radio on him. I could hear him yelling into the radio and cursing at the Croats. He was telling them, "Do not shell the fucking school, it is only refugees here, that is it, do not shell the school." The school was not shelled. We ended up going into the basement of the school and sleeping on the concrete. Some of the men volunteered to go and fight against the Croats, but they were not given weapons and were told to stay in the school. My father's brother, the uncle with the dog whose wife and children were in Croatia, came down in the basement with a burqa on his head and hid. That made me laugh at him so much. Even the women there were like, "What the hell are you doing?" He said, "I have to see my wife and children at least one more time. I do not want to die." This went on for a few nights and days. We stayed in the school. My mother was able to get an onion from someone. She took the onion and put it in a plate, baked it and fed it to me and my siblings. The smell of the onion and the taste was the best food I had ever eaten. Now I know why. It is because we have not eaten for 3 days. One night the Muslims brought in wounded soldiers. My father went up there with some tools, pliers and some knives. He ended up taking out shrapnel from some soldiers' bodies. I remember walking by a table with a soldier lying on his face, his back all bloodied up, and my father digging in there with a knife. The Croats and Muslims stopped fighting after about a week. It all went back to normal. We went back to Travnik the next day. We slept at some people's apartment one night, and I could walk by the working restaurants there and smell the food, but I did not ask my mother to go buy us food. I knew we had no money, and even if we had any, it was little and buying lunch there meant nothing for us. My father went to the war command and told them that he wants to sign up to go to war, but they have to take care of his family, give us food and place to stay. They declined his offer, told him to get us out of Travnik and to come back. They actually had him sign a paper saying that he will come back and fight once he is able to take us out of Bosnia. We went back to Stari Travnik again to the school. It was fine now. The Croats and Muslims were not fighting, but tensions were high. My father found a local man from Travnik and started working for him. My father was a good handyman and welder machinist. One evening we were sitting there at the guy's house, him and my father were drinking. He told my father a few times, "You are a sellout, you should have died in your town, you should have fought." My father said, "If I killed one Serb, what do you think would have happened to my family?" By this time the man got mad, but my father got up, grabbed him by his throat, and said, "If you ever talk to me like this again in front of my family, I will kill you." He told us to pack our stuff and leave right away. We left and went back to the school. Again my mother was able to get some flour, my father found some sheet metal and made some type of a cooking pan so my mother could bake us some bread. It tasted awful, but it was warm bread we had not eaten for days. I would go out with the other kids and walk from house to house. People would see us and close their blinds and doors. They did not answer their doors as already people walked by and asked for food. The whole country was at war. I do not blame them, they probably had no food either. The villages seemed empty when we would walk by. I ended up meeting a local boy that said he would take us to his house and that he had a full basement of pears and apples. He said we could have some. We went in the basement and started eating the fruit when a male voice yelled, "You thieves, I should kill you all now." We jumped out of the basement and ran away. I wanted to say, "But your son said we could eat here." It was too late, we ran away. I would run by and see soldiers going to the front lines on tanks and running. I would hear the tanks and mortars not too far away firing. I knew that was the direction not to go. I came back to the school where everyone was. My mother said, "The Croats said that we can leave Travnik for Posice in Croatia." I was happy to hear that. I knew that getting out of there was the way to go. The next day, buses were brought to the school. We were told that we are going to be taken to Posice, another city, and from there we would be able to go to Zagreb and look for aid. Denmark, Sweden, Germany and other European nations accepted refugees from the Bosnian conflict. From Zagreb people would be able to get to Western Europe until the war was over. We got onto a bus and started heading towards Posice. We had to take a back way as many of the roads were blocked off and bridges destroyed. We had to navigate through a mountain pass and drive through small villages to get to Posice. We left one morning, and at night I would look outside the window of the bus, and the cliffs were only a few feet away. It was raining, and the buses jumped all over the road. It was a dirt mountain road. The buses had to do 3 to 4 point turns to make some of the big curves and continue going. We finally made it to an asphalt road, and it was daylight. We slept in the bus that day as we were not allowed to pass by the Croats. The Croats armed came into the bus and said, "Where are you people going? Croatia is not accepting any more refugees. Turn back." The bus drivers did not want to turn back, nor did the people in the buses. The Croats pointed at some of the men and cursed, said, "Where are you going? Go fight the Serbs." The men did not say anything. Some showed them the papers like my father had. The Croats just ripped them up and said they meant nothing in Croatia. We spent 2 days in a bus sleeping on the side of the road. We were then allowed to move forward and head towards Posice. A few hours later we arrived at Posice. We were dropped off at the center. The army and the police came there. They said, "Get back in the bus and go back to Travnik." We got back on the bus. The bus drivers drove for a few kilometers, stopped the buses and said, "Who wants to get out? Get out now. The rest are going back to Travnik." We got off the bus, me, my parents and the 2 siblings. It was a nice sunny day, I remember. We had a few bags and the 5 of us standing on the road. I looked at my father. I will never forget this moment, like it was yesterday. I said, "Dad, what are we going to do now?" He said, "I do not know, son. I do not know, but we can't stay here." We started walking towards Posice, got to a nearby hotel, sat by the front, while my father started asking around where we can stay and what we can do. No one there offered rooms or work. We were instructed to go to a nearby school where the refugees were. We got there again to a school. Outside in the yard of the school were porta potties. Dug out shit holes where people could go to the bathroom. Again it smelled horrible. We walked into the gymnasium and the classrooms. One could not sleep there from the smell and the crying babies. We slept there for 3 days I think, some humanitarian agency I think the Red Cross brought food and cookies, I had a bunch of cookies, and I was happy for the rest of the day. The next day again I started walking around and venturing out. I got to a nearby Croat church and saw a couple of the humanitarian trucks being offloaded. I went back and told my father, he said damn thieves, they are taking the goods meant for the refugees and are going to sell them. To some war means profit, I could not believe people could be so inhumane, watch others suffer from starvation while they sell the food that was meant for them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.